the sports world could be crowning two new champions as early as Wednesday due to the events of Game 4 of the NBA and Stanley Cup Finals. So let's get into it, starting with the NBA Finals in Game 4. It's the Nuggets winning in Miami. Final score 108-95. They have taken a convincing stranglehold on this series, and that is troubling for the Heat because, in my opinion, just watching the game, this felt like the most underwhelming game from Jokic and Murray so far this series, and that is a crazy statement to say since the Joker got a triple-double and Jamal Murray had a double-double in his own right. But just watching the game, you look at the stats and you feel like it looks like they had killer games, but watching the game, it felt like their impact wasn't as strong as it was in other games in this series. And again, that's concerning for the Heat because in a game where, Jokic was dealing with some foul trouble, Jamal Murray showing up at times, but maybe not as much as in others, and they, not only to not win, but really just be outperformed, and still it looked like another dominating second half performance by the Nuggets. And now you're down 3-1 in this series. The Heat are with their back against the wall, and not a whole lot of evidence suggesting that they have the gas in the tank to come back in this one. Aaron Gordon also a standout for the Denver Nuggets in this game. Bruce Brown also with a tremendous night off the bench in Game 4. So a couple of new, not necessarily new faces, but a couple of usually role players getting some time in the sun because they had tremendous performances for Denver in this one. Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo, again, they had solid games, but no one really else on the Heat roster really rising to the occasion, meeting the moment as they should. Gabe Vincent and Max Strus, really, they've just been non-factors. They've been awful. And while Jimmy Butler, again, he's had a lot of solid games in this series, he hasn't really taken over a game for really any prolonged period of time. It's never really felt like Jimmy Butler has transitioned into Himmy Butler at all in this series, where, yeah, sometimes he'll have stretches of good play, but it's never really felt like he is far and away the best player on the court for any prolonged stretch like I just mentioned. It does seem like he hasn't had that time where he looks superhuman like we've seen throughout this playoff run that's been necessary for the Heat to get this far. And now that he's kind of come back down to earth a little bit, it is looking a bit troublesome for Miami in this series. Now, the game itself told, in my opinion, a pretty similar story to Game 3, where the game is pretty competitive and pretty close, back and forth in the early stages of the game. Denver taking a slight lead into halftime, and then the Nuggets pulling away in the third quarter and being able to maintain that lead in the fourth. Again, the Miami Heat had Nikola Jokic in foul trouble. They weren't able to capitalize on that, which I feel like that's going to be a missed opportunity there. Credit to the Nuggets defense for rising to the occasion, making it hard when in clutch situations where the Heat are maybe they're looking to get a bit of momentum going. The Nuggets defense has put the clamps down when they needed to, and Game 5 is tonight. They're back in Denver. It's possible that the Nuggets can win this championship in a pretty comfortable series at home in 5 games. Maybe that's what some people expected looking at the matchup with the Heat. And now, the Heat were on this great run, but now they've just ran into a Denver team that, quite frankly, has just looked like the better, more talented team throughout this series. But again, the Miami Heat, they've been turning it around. They've been turning the turntables all throughout this playoff run. But it doesn't look like it's going to be the case this time, where they truly do look outmatched in every single way. Unless Jimmy Butler suddenly transforms into superhuman Jimmy, and even if they do get Game 5, the issue then becomes they have to win 2 more times in a row against this Denver Nuggets team that just it looks like they're outclassing the Heat up to this point. Moving on to the NHL and the Stanley Cup Finals, it was Vegas holding on in a 3-2 win over the Florida Panthers on the road. The Golden Knights now are also up 3-1, so both Florida teams have their back against the wall, and they're dealing with 3-1 deficits. Wes McCauley and the officials are a story in this one. We know how Wes McCauley games go at this point. I usually don't try to put blame on officiating or talk about them all that much. I do feel like, social media to keep up with the game does that enough. I try to keep it more on what was happening with the players, but I do feel like with this one, Wes McCauley, we know that Wes McCauley and his crew are going to let a lot of things go. There was a really weird sequence near the end of the game where Florida has I believe, Bobrovsky was out of the net and Florida's trying to press for that tying goal. And all of a sudden, a ref blows the whistle and the play is just stopped with Florida in the offensive zone. Not really sure what that was for. I can't really explain that one again. I try not to put, I try not to look too much into officiating, but that was a really weird sequence in this one. Chandler Stevenson, probably the most prolific skater for Vegas, looking at this game with those 2 goals, putting Vegas up to nothing. Although I still would say that Vegas's best player throughout this series and in this game was Adin Hill. He put in a tremendous game in goaltender. I think Bobrovsky was solid as well. It just so happens that he was on the losing side of that. And well, when the team that wins is going to give more credit to the goaltender than the team that loses, that's usually how it goes. So like I just mentioned, Stevenson's 2 goals put Vegas up to nothing. Then Carlson scored to make it 3-0, and Florida looked dead, kind of like they did in Game 3, where it looked like it wasn't going to work out for Florida. However, the Panthers do get a fluky goal. It pinballed off of 2 Golden Knights defensemen, and so after the second period, it is 3-1, where Florida, they're still down 2 goals, and it's not ideal, but they're not quite dead yet. That momentum carries over early into the third, when Barkov would score on a really nice play to get the game within 1, and the rest of the third period is exciting. Both teams getting some pretty good looks, and both goaltenders standing tall. And in the end stage of the game, when Bobrovsky is pulled out of the net, it was Adin Hill turning into a brick wall as time expired. But on replay, he saved 2 shots near the expiry of the game. But looking back on replay, neither shot would have actually counted. Both of those saves were after the clock had already hit zeros. And as time expires, essentially all hell breaks loose as Florida starts a brawl with everybody. Alex Pietrangelo coming out of the penalty box and joining in the scrum. You're not supposed to do that. I haven't seen if the league has looked at that or anything like that, but given how the league has handled Alex Pietrangelo misdeeds in the past, especially this being the Stanley Cup Finals, I highly doubt that would be looked at for anything. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be. I'm just saying based off previous precedent and how they've handled these things in the past, it would surprise me if Alex Pietrangelo sees anything more than maybe a fine. And anybody involved in this brawl, they might get fines, but I doubt they get suspended actual games for what happened on the ice at the end of the game. And I feel like Florida throughout this entire series, they've been trying to play the rat a little bit. They've been trying to goad Vegas into making some undisciplined mistakes, and that hasn't happened, or at least it hasn't been called. If it has happened, I understand that there's a lot that you can say about the officiating and what does get called and what doesn't get called, but I feel like that's an issue with every playoffs in every sport, especially in the NHL, when a completely different rule book takes over when the playoffs start. And so if that doesn't work, the Panthers will just start to let fists fly, and we've seen throughout each and every game the Panthers lose when it's getting down to near the end of the game. The Panthers, they're just going to hit you because that's what they're going to take their pound of flesh on their way out and see if Vegas retaliates in an undisciplined way. And I guess you can say again, with Alex Pietrangelo leaving a penalty box and joining a scrum, that should be a no-no, but again, I don't think the league's going to do anything about it. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't. I'm just saying, again, that's the precedent they're setting for themselves. That's how they've handled stuff like this in the past and in this playoff as well. I don't see many extracurricular punishment coming from this incident. And again, Game 5 tomorrow night back in Vegas. We could see a couple teams winning championships at home. And we'll see what happens tonight and tomorrow night. And if there's more games to play, then I will prolong this series. But I will be doing an individual video on each champion. Right now, it looks like it's going to be Denver and Vegas. But that's why we actually play the games, because who knows? Maybe the Heat or the Panthers, one of these Florida teams, can pull off the Hollywood miracle upset comeback, but it looks pretty dire for both of those teams right now. So thank you all for watching. If you made it this far into the video, let me know what you think about these finals series down in the comments below. If you have any thoughts, I'll see you at the next one.